again, and welcome to War Stories, media war stories, behind the scenes tales from the front lines of the media. I'm your host, Tom Curley. How are you all doing out there today? For those of you just tuning in for the first time, me and old friends of mine from the business, show business, I was a director for CBS for almost 40 years. We get together and we shoot the shit telling old war stories about crazy stuff that happened in front of and behind the camera. And of course, I can't do it without my partner in crime, Mr. Garry Armstrong, veteran Boston TV reporter. Garry, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. Are you sure you can say shoot the shit on this program?
Yes, I can. I can do that because when I put it up on YouTube, I have to click a button that says, "Is this for all audiences or for mature audiences?" And I click mature, which might actually be a misnomer because, as we all know, I am not very mature at
And
all. That always bugs me when when a movie comes up, the up in the upper corner, the warnings. Okay, all right, those have always I find are weird. All right, so okay, what do you have? You have violence, nudity,
yes,
foul language. Okay, all right, that makes
yes,
sense. Um, Sexual situations, right? But lately there's a new one, and
right,
it's always at the end. Smoking. All right, smoking.
yes.
Are there people out there that are going, hey, there's smoking in this movie? Yeah, cover the kid's head. Now, and also think about it. We read from left to right, right? So here's how your
True.
brain works. Violence, yeah, okay, no problem. Nudity, sure, yeah, okay. Sexual situations, cool. Foul language, great. Smoking? Turn this movie off. What the hell? And there's a new one now, and I've seen it. I saw it for the first time yesterday, and now I've seen it twice. Fear,
Fear?
violence, sexual situations, smoking, fear. It's like, oh my god,
Wow.
hey, 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 this movie's got fear in it. What does that even? What does that even mean? I mean, who and who
There's
thinks these things?
there's one other reference I've noticed in some of my old westerns, my beloved old westerns. They also have outdated cultural references, which is so true, obviously, because we all know
Outdated.
uh, that the Native Americans were not all villains, and we all know that the brave white settlers were not all good guys. And people sometimes who have watched these movies over the years still think that way. So they've decided to put in the Chiron out of date cultural references. Now, I don't know whether they'll ever put that in on our podcast because we may be out of date, but I don't know.
Exactly. I mean, I mean, who, what is it? The motion picture? I mean, MMPA or something like that. Who makes up this stuff? Anyway, I wow. So the show has started, and we've already completely gotten off on tangents. Um, a few quick notes. The show that we aired that we published this week. This show is not going to air for a number of weeks, but the show that was published this week was the one that you and I did where we talked about actual war stories. We talked about
Yeah.
war, and it wasn't very well. It wasn't funny at all, and I was surprised by the reaction that we got to it because I have to admit, when I was editing it, I was going, gee, should we really air this? I mean, is this really interesting? And my wife Ellen, she was just riveted, and we got a comment from our probably our number one fan and chief fact checker, Alex, who just raved. He said, this is a great show. And I was just, you know, surprised. You know, because I was thinking, well, it's, you know, but he did make an interesting comment. I didn't realize how serious that, you know, we were getting. We were talking about war and the
Yeah.
draft and how the draft evolved. And you told a fantastic story about John Wayne admitting that, you know, he had never actually been in a war situation and he, you know, wasn't sure how he would react if he was getting shot at, which I thought was really cool. And then we started, you know, telling actual stories about the war. And Alex made an interesting comment. The graphics, you know, which are done by our artificial intelligence program, the Chironomatic 2000 instantaneous graphics generator, uh, you know, kept making snarky comments. And he said, you know, maybe you shouldn't have done the snarky comments when you started talking about real war. And I thought, wow, you know, I got to admit, I never really thought about that. And, you know, and I'm sorry, but this AI program has a mind of its own. There's really not much I can do to rein it in.
Right.
Um, but yeah, that was interesting. And then he said at the end,
Well,
you know, we have a little, yeah,
you
go
know,
ahead.
it's a good point, Tom. It's a good point because we were talking about real war, even though our show is entitled Media Wars. Sometimes people take issue with uh, folks softening the impact, softening what they went through, what their loved ones went through. I have a real peeve with sports people who who use war terminology to describe how they play the game. You have baseball players, football players, etc., talking about how they would go to war with so and so and how it was a rough game and they were in the trenches with their baseball players. And I'm offended by that. it, I know what they're trying
Yes,
to do, but I just think it really lacks a lot of respect for them to equate playing sports with being in
yes,
combat.
yes. You know, it's funny.
Now that
Um, that brings to mind a great story. Um, uh, CBS used to have, probably still does, have staff announcers. Okay. And these were guys, oh, I think there maybe was like maybe five of them. Okay. And their main job was to go, this is CBS. This is 60 Minutes. This is the CBS Morning News. Okay. And they got paid a lot of money and they had a lifetime job. It was a permanent job. And
right,
and over the years the company discovered that in their after contract they could make them do extra stuff. Like at CBS FM they had to read the news. All right. So they had to write and read the news. And on the CBS Morning News, they also did the sports. They did the voiceover to the sports. Okay. So we had this one guy, I think his name was, I can't remember his name. He was one of the old guys, had been there probably since the 30s. And at the end, you know how when you give the sports scores, for some reason you have to, all right, the Yankees destroyed the Cardinals. The so and so trounced the so and so. The so he was doing football scores and he had all these and he
right.
did like five or six of them and he ran out of analogies. He ran out of words. And he said, and so trounced so and then finally the Dallas Cowboys failed to score more points than the New York Giants and they lost. And I just went, what? I was like, okay, that's fine. But um, but yeah, it was interesting. But it's funny. You know, talking about war, I have this is really cool. All right, this is an obscure book. Okay, it's
Uh-huh.
called The
Yes.
Axis Grand Strategy. Now, This book was given to me by my ex-wife, and it's a cool gift. She found it in an obscure bookstore. And what this book is all of the writings of all of the military generals and admirals in Germany in World War II and leading up to World War II. German military people loved to write down everything. They loved to write down how they were going to win a war. There's a great line in the movie Patton with George George C. Scott,
See, Scott.
where at the George C. Scott, where at the end of one of the battles with Rommel, he's looking over the battlefield and he says,
Rommel, you magnificent bastard, I read your book!
and if you had read this book, you would know everything that Germany was going to do in World War II because it's exactly what they did in World War II. And if you could find these military writings, you would know exactly how the battle was going to do because they all wrote it down and then they did exactly what they wrote down. I've always just
Amazing.
found that really, really, really strange. Really strange. So, what is it we decided we were going to talk about this week?
Well,
I guess
we were on the topic of war, and it
war.
sort of leads me to a story about Ronald Reagan when he was running as a candidate for his what would be his first term as president. And I was what they call, and you would understand it. I was the backup reporter. The primary reporter for our station was near Reagan. I was working the crowd, and I was supposed to get comments from Reagan if and when he passed by. That's almost a mission impossible. But I lucked out, and he had to stop for I think a cup of water or something like that. And being the very respectful reporter that I was, I I need a couple of reporters to my left and right, and walked right up to Reagan, shoved the mic in front of him, and I said, "Dutch, uh, it's good to see you in this particular reign. Do you have any movie lines or anything you want to offer us?" And he said, "Well, I have to be very respectful because I'm running for the office of Commander in Chief." And I said, I remember one movie you made where you were with Errol Flynn. And he said, "Oh, no, let's not go into that." And I said, "No, it was really good." I said, "Remember the Santa Fe Trail? That's when you played George Armstrong Custer." And his smile started to widen. And I said, "By the way, I'm no relation to Custer, even though his middle name was Armstrong." And he said, "Well," and the way that Ronald Reagan used to go, he said, "Well, I never knew that, but
Wow.
that's really interesting. What is your first name?" And I said, "Well, it isn't George." And he said, "No, I said, what is your first name?" And I said, "Why are you talking that way?" And he said, "Because that's the way I talk." I said, "Okay, my first name is Garry. And remember uh, that movie you made with Errol Flynn?" And he said, "Yeah, Errol always used to try to one up me." I said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Because, Errol's politics we were very suspicious of him. And those who remember Ronald Reagan prior to his entering the political arena will know that as an actor, he was infamous with his actor friends for always being a political type. He was involved in the union, AFTRA, and SAG, and all that sort of thing. And while people would be talking normal Hollywood, jabber, 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 he would walk in, he would break up the conversation, and he would start talking politics until the crowd just quietly drifted away and Ronald Reagan would be talking to himself. So I said to him, I heard from someone that you were at a party for so and you were talking politics and you emptied the room. And he said, "Well, how can you prove that?" And I said, "Well, I was talking to John Wayne." He said, "You talked to Duke Wayne?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, how does Duke Wayne know that?" He said, "Because he was at that party and you started in on what was perceived to be isolationist propaganda. And John Wayne did not like that." And he said he and a bunch of other people, including Betty Davis, yada, 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 they just emptied the room. You cleared it like a Hoover vacuum. And he said, "Ha, ha, 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 that's not true." And I said, "Are you calling me a liar, sir?" And he said, no, but let's continue this political trial here because I'm on my way to become a member of the greatest job in the world. And I said, what is that? President of the SAG? And he said, no, 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 no. I'm going to become the president of the United States. And then I looked at him and I said, well, where's the rest of you?
Where's the rest of me?
And he said, huh? I said, where's the rest of you? And he said, wait a minute, wait a minute. What movie was that? And I said, King's Row. Remember, you played Drake. The guy cuts off your leg in the movie. That was the best role you ever had. You've forgotten it? And he said, well, and I said, well, we could talk about Death Valley Days, brought to you by Baraxo. He said, oh, Baraxo, that was really good. He said, I'm having trouble following you. You're supposed to be talking to me about my political campaign. And I said, we'll get to that in a minute. And just as soon as I said, remember, this is not Hollywood, one of his people came along and grabbed him and said, enough time talking with that reporter. He's not one of our own. And Reagan looks at me and says, well, I'll see you later, son. And he walked away.
Wow. Here's a little factoid, and I'm sure if there's any conservative people watching that their heads are about to explode. And now I read this, so I'm not claiming its veracity, but in the 1930s, Ronald Reagan applied to become a member of the Communist Party, and he was turned down.
Well.
And you know why? Because they said he wasn't smart enough. Because he wasn't.
That is a good inside one.
That's not. I would now. I'm sure that there's. I'm sure that there's right-wing heads that are exploding. How did we get here? How did this happen? I remember in 1968 thinking nobody in their right mind is ever going to actually vote for Richard Nixon, and he got elected twice. And then I remember in 1980, who in their right mind is going to vote for a movie actor, a grade B movie actor, whose biggest claim to fame is hawking Baraxo on Wagon Train and making a movie with a chimp and saying win
Bonzo.
one for the Gipper. Bonzo. and of course, well, he won. And now I also, in 2016, there's no way in hell anybody's going to elect this guy, a wannabe, reality TV show star. And of course we were wrong. And now we're living in a world where they're talking about, he's going to be running again. And he's going to be spending more time in court than he is at political rallies. What this is insane. I did a piece, a blog, actually. It was for Maryland's blog many, many years ago. And it was called, and we were talking about, Trump. And it was called, when I'm confused about things, I think, what would Captain Kirk do? Okay. And in this case of, how do we deal with the fact that we got to where we were in 2016? Well, Captain Kirk would, of course, have Spock do the calculations. We would slingshot around the sun and go back in time and fix it. So I would go back in time and I would somehow get to speak with Bill Clinton just before the Monica Lewinsky affair. Now, how did I do this? Don't ask, you're ruining the bit. So I would meet with Bill Clinton and I would say, do not have sex with Monica Lewinsky. And he would go, well, what? How do you know that? I go, I'm from the future. All right. And he would say, well, why? I said, well, because when you have this affair with Monica Lewinsky, it's going to come out. It's going to become a scandal. You're going to be impeached. All right. You're not going to be convicted, but the stain on you, even though you will be more popular after the impeachment than you were before, when your Vice President Al Gore runs for president in 2000, you can't campaign for him because he's going to avoid you like the plague. And then the Supreme Court is going to award the presidency to George W. Bush, even though he only won by 500 votes in one state, even though you won the popular vote. And then in 2016, your wife is going to be running against Donald Trump. And at this point, the Secret Service escorts me out the room.
Yeah.
And as I'm going on, I go, when you say it out loud, I can see your whole point. But now go back to 2016 and say what's going on now. What? And some people on the news are starting to say it like, is any of this real? I mean, I can run from prison. I'm a convicted felon,
Well, I shouldn't
but I'm
laugh.
still
I should
going to
not
run
laugh
for
at that.
president. I know we shouldn't laugh, but really, has it's gotten that insane?
Well, you know as we tape this podcast, the prognosticators are saying that all these stories, the indictments, the court appearances, the possibility of by the time this podcast airs, he may be behind bars. His people, and not just his people, a lot of political people are saying this is good for him. It's boosted his stock. He's still leading those Republicans who seek to run for the office of president. All this nasty stuff, this negative stuff, it's all good in terms if you want to get the votes, if you want to get a hold of the voters, there's nothing you can do that's not going to get them to vote for you. So,
of course, but again,
it really is bizarre.
It's bizarre, but it's also, yes, it's all about, his base. Okay, yes, he has a base, which is a cult. They are no different from a cult. Did you see that poll that came out a couple of weeks ago? And it was a conservative poll, and they found that amongst his supporters, 72% believe him telling the truth. They would believe him over their parents, their wives, their husbands, their children, or their pastors, their religious leaders. And this is a guy who, was documented as lying over 30,000 times during 4 years while he was in office. And you can't fight that. But again, it's a minority of the country. And, you can't inflame his base anymore. People go, this is just going to charge it up. How much more charged up can you get? They're already at 11. And they're always there. And, the crazy, I remember I heard one of them saying, you never saw a flag with Joe Biden's face on it. That means he's useless. And I go, you're really not supposed to have a flag with anybody's face on it. All right? I mean, that's just weird. And the other thing I've noticed is not only do all these crazies have these flags, but they're huge flags. I mean, really, really big flags. And I don't have the heart to tell them, but it's a medical fact that I think the size of your flag is inversely proportional to the size of your, shall we say, genitalia.
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it's I just like I said, being in news.
Have you noticed that
the
latest line that he is using is that they're not coming after me. They're not subpoenaing me. They're not trying to indict me. They're coming after you. They're coming after your families. And that's why you can't trust these people. So he's saying, not only is he saying he's innocent, but he's also saying that the government is coming after his people. And that's why they should stand fast and stand solidly behind him.
And I'm standing in between them. And the sad part is, it's with this base, it's sort of brilliant because and hell, I'll find pictures. The hardcore, most hardcore of his base, he's their Jesus Christ. I mean, they'll say it right out. He's being persecuted just like our Lord. I love Jesus first
Yeah.
and him second, and he's doing the whole. I am being persecuted, not prosecuted, persecuted for
Right.
your sins, and now the other 70% of the country, and I'm being generous here, saying that 30%, are with this guy.
Right.
No, you're not being persecuted for your sins. You're being prosecuted for your crimes. And but
Correct.
it doesn't matter what you say. And anything that comes out that's bad is a positive for this guy. You were convicted of sexual abuse. Well, that's a plus in my book. Everybody thought that the Access Hollywood tape. I'd grab him by the P
Right.
word.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. It's over. No, it's a positive. I mean, we've come from a world where Dan Quayle, the vice president, misspelled potato, and it ended his career. Okay, to now, you've been indicted 4 times. You might be convicted before the 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 uh, the
Correct.
Republican convention, and people are going, "Oh, that doesn't make any difference." I I I don't. I just don't get it.
It spins me back a little bit to the Ronald Reagan story I was sharing with you. A bit later that day, as he was campaigning, we had a break, and he being Ronald Reagan was just taking questions from people, and I managed to sidle my way up again, and goodness knows why they let me near him. Uh, but I said to him, "Do you've been governor? You've been very active in the Screen Actors Union. Uh, how does this particular office, how does this particular campaign seem like?" And he just looked at me and he said, "Well, well, good question. You know, I used to have scripts, and I always played the same role. I was always a good guy. I I loved the flag, and that's what I'm doing here." And I said, "You're playing a role?" And he said, "Well, think about it. Look around you." And we looked around at the cameras, and I said, "You know, I think maybe you've got something there, but here's the difference. You're going to have to get it on one take." And he said, "What? Wait. What do you mean?" I said, "This is not like shooting a movie. What you do here is live. There are no retakes." And he said, "Well, I don't know about that." I said, "This is not Death Valley days anymore." And he looked up and he said, "But here we are in the cradle of liberty, Boston." And I said, "Right, but there's no cradle here." And I said, "Do you remember what happened in Boston 7 or 8 years ago when I was referring to the busting situation?" He said, "Yes, that was so nasty. It should have been dealt with in more family like ways, like we talk about on Death Valley days." I said, "But this isn't television, Mr. Reagan." He said, "Well, we'll see about that. And if I need more than one take, I'll do more than one take because I'm the Gipper." And that was it. The politicians down through the years have often just looked at us and said, "That's the audience. We know how to spin them, and that's what we're going to do."
And he was the beginning of the TV reality star president. Ronald Reagan played the president better than anybody, and he was really
Oh,
good at
yes.
reading a teleprompter. And
Overseas,
there's a
he was done
direct
as the
line.
cowboy president.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's a direct line from him to where we are today. To which I say, maybe it's not a good idea to have an actor or a reality TV star to hold public office. The thing that has always driven me crazy about politics, all right, and which is they all run on the same premise. I've never held office before. I'm a complete
Right.
outsider. I know nothing about this job That's why I'm most qualified to be the president of the United States. Okay? Okay. Now imagine, you're interviewing a contractor and he goes, I've never built a house in my goddamn life. I wouldn't know a hammer from a wrench from a nail. I'm the guy you should hire. I have never fixed a toilet in my life. I'm the guy that this should be your plumber. What? And it works every time. Well, anyway, we have run so over, it's not even funny. Nonetheless, it was fun. There was a bunch of other things that we'll obviously get to next week. So let's rush through the plugs. Serendipity, Seeking Intelligent Life on Earth, Maryland's blog. We all love it. We all write for it. Voice Tapes Audio Theater for the best in audio drama and comedy. A half-hour radio show. Very, very funny. And, of course, my sister podcast, Get Off My Lawn with me, where we talk about life, the universe, and everything. So, Garry, until next time, doodles.